Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's lovely to be with you all again in this context. It's very special. It can be really difficult sometimes to open an ancient text from the library that we have in the Old Testament and make sense of it in a way that is impactful and helpful for us today. Sometimes the language, even when translated into modern English, can be challenging for us. The concepts can seem somewhat otherworldly, and the social and historical context can seem so vastly different to our own that it can be hard to really engage with. That being said, of course, we do that, don't we? We do it regularly, and I'm convinced that we can do that in such a way as to gain great strength and insight from what we understand and read. This morning, what I'd like to do is just briefly enter the world of Habakkuk and get a sense of what his experience was. And to enter that world, it's amazing to think that we've got to time travel, as it were, back about 2,600 years. Just imagine that. It's still a bit of a fantasy of mine for that to be possible. To be able to dial up any date in the past and be there. Not necessarily as a participant, but just, a bit of a time-travelling fly on the wall, just to observe the reality of what's occurred. And were we to do that, what would we see in Habakkuk's day? What would we discern about his experience? Well, we'd have landed in about 600 or so BC. We'd be in Israel, but whereabouts in Israel, we wouldn't be able to easily tell. We know nothing about Habakkuk's, the man, or the place in which he lived, but we do know something about the times in which he lived. We would learn that for many years, the geopolitical powers of the day has been the empires of Egypt down in the south and Assyria up in the north. But we would hear tidings of a new power arising in the northeast. The empire of Assyria was gradually being absorbed by the Chaldeans. Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, had fallen, and the rumours were that the Chaldeans were a devastatingly effective army and just as cruel as the Assyrian had been. But as much as this might be the case and the reality of the rumours and the news of the day, it's actually not something that Habakkuk is initially concerned about. That's happening many miles away, and Habakkuk's concerns initially are far more local. He's looking around, in fact, at his own nation, and he's appalled by the moral conditions of his people. And what's more, he's pretty ticked off. Because he's been complaining. He's been complaining to God about it, and nothing is getting done. People are getting away with it. In fact, he says God is idle. Verse 2 of Habakkuk chapter 1, O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence and you will not save? Verse 3, why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. The law is paralysed, he says. There's corruption in high places. Justice isn't being done. And frankly, God, I am sick of it. I want action, God. I want you to deal with this. It's been going on for far too long. Pretty bold. Pretty confrontational. And he now gets a response that he was not expecting. Essentially, it's this. In verse 5 to 11 of chapter 1, God says, Habakkuk, I agree. You're right. Judgment is needed. And I've got a plan. I'm going to share it with you. I'm going to bring the Chaldean down in judgment on the nation. Habakkuk, just wait and see. They are a fearsome people. They're frightening, Habakkuk. Their horses are swifter than leopards. They fly like an eagle, swift to devour. They're going to gather captives as they advance, like you scoop up handfuls of sand. Fortresses, walls, they're nothing to these people, Habakkuk. They'll roll over the top of them. Don't worry. If you want judgment to come, I've got it covered. I've summoned the Chaldean. He's coming. Well, you might think that that's welcome news to Habakkuk. But in fact, the news blindsided him. Whoa, hang on a second. God, really? Let me just back up a bit. God, the Chaldeans, they're wicked. They're treacherous. They're merciless. I've heard rumours of their violence and their brutality. Surely not. You're not going to use the wicked to swallow up the righteous. Well, when I say righteous God, I admit I was saying that they were wicked before, but comparatively speaking, I mean, the Chaldeans, Lord, you can't bring them against your people. And it seems that as much as he was upset about the wickedness of his own people, he still thought that on balance, his people were more righteous than the Chaldeans. So how could it be that God was going to use the Chaldeans in this way? Not only that, but God, if you unleash the Chaldeans in this way, it's going to unleash a flood of wickedness that's going to envelop more nations than just ours. They'll go on mercilessly killing forever. It's not always easy to understand what God's up to, is it? And Habakkuk is struggling with this, and he wants more answers to these questions. In fact, he demands them. Verse 1 of chapter 2. I will take my stand at my watchpost and station. I will station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. So he's going to take his stand and he's going to see what the Lord says in response to his objection. In verse 2, the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. I'm going to give you a message, Habakkuk. It's going to make a person want to run. Verse 3, for still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. So this vision that I'm going to give you, Habakkuk, it's not necessarily going to happen tomorrow. You're going to have to wait. It's going to tarry. But I promise you, I'm not lying. It will come to pass. And verse 4 seems to be an acknowledgement of the Chaldean's pride. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him. But, here's this famous phrase, the righteous shall live by his faith. So, what is this vision? What is this message? And how was it going to help a person who reads it to run? In fact, some people, many commentators in fact, have looked at that passage and said, well, write it so that someone might run and read it. Well, must be talking about the fact that he was to write it really big on a wall so that someone running past could read it. Pretty popular view. I'm going to suggest that that's not the case, but bear with me if that's something that you sort of wedded to in terms of an idea for this verse, and see whether the context as we go through explains the meaning of run in this sense. And what follows in chapter 2 is this vision that God's going to give Habakkuk to inspire the faithful. And it's a strange one. It's a series of woes, 5 of them. And it's an imprecation of coming judgment. See, the Chaldeans had begun and were set now to plunder many nations. They were going to be successful. But God says to Habakkuk, their day of reckoning will come. They too are going to be looted and plundered. Their treachery, their violence, their idolatry, all of it's been noted, Habakkuk, and judgment and shame is their destiny. And that's what the rest of chapter 2 is about. the graphic illustration of the Chaldeans' downfall. And yet in the middle of all these woes, there's these little nuggets. Here's one, verse 14, a little nugget for Habakkuk, a verse that we well know, but look at it in context. For the earth, verse 14, will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Not filled, Habakkuk, with the Chaldean, or even the Israelites who don't listen to the law. Not filled with this Chaldean who's spreading his knowledge of dark arts, brutality and idol worship, but filled instead with the knowledge of God's glory. Habakkuk, that's the ultimate aim, and I promise you, though it tarry long, it remains the ultimate outcome. Now remember that he was told that the just will live by faith. What is faith? Isn't it this? Isn't it the ability to make real in one's mind God's promises? To make it real in one's mind to such an extent that it makes enduring the present doable and enables us to live by that faith day by day despite difficult circumstances. That's what faith in essence is. Well, Habakkuk, I'm going to give you this vision of the Chaldeans' ultimate downfall. And it works. It galvanizes Habakkuk. It's like all of a sudden he gets it. He's reassured. He can see the big picture. And it takes him beyond the circumstances of his little present existence. And it has him thinking wider and larger than the immediate reality of the Chaldeans' advance. And he's now seeing what God sees. That wickedness, that oppression, that crime, that violence, all these things are going to be dealt with. And he's able to anticipate with tremendous clarity now, because of this vision, that the Chaldean will not rule forever. And so in chapter 3, we've got this prayer of Habakkuk in which he anticipates God going forth in battle. It's a fearful thing to behold God going forward in judgment. And he now realises that sometimes this might actually even involve God employing the use and the means and methods that don't make sense to his people in the interim. And so at the beginning of this section, chapter 3, reading verse 2 from the NET, Habakkuk makes this plea. He says, Lord, I've heard the report of what you did. I am awed, Lord, by what you accomplished. In our time, repeat those deeds. In our time, reveal them again. But when you cause turmoil, remember to show us mercy. And so he anticipates and envisions Yahweh riding forth for the salvation of his people. The sun and the moon stand still, arrows speed, spears glitter, and the house of the wicked is crushed. And the effect of this for Habakkuk is very real. Verse 16, again from the NET, I listened and my stomach churned. The sound made my lips quiver. My frame went limp, as if my bones were decaying, and I shook as I tried to walk. I long, Lord, for the day of distress to come upon the people who attack us. That seems a bit odd, doesn't it? What a thing to long for. It might seem strange to us that it's a vision of the destruction of his enemy being that which he finds so inspiring. But if we were to think about it, isn't every vision of the kingdom to come about the elimination of suffering and its causes? The visions that we have of God's ultimate victory over this world and the reign of the Lord Jesus Christ are as much about what the kingdom will be as what it will not be. Destruction of sin, the injustice that we see, the oppression of the poor and the needy, these things are going to be eliminated. A vision of them being finally and utterly put down by Yahweh and the saints going forth in battle That's a wonderful vision. And Habakkuk 3 finishes up with this glorious section, verse 17 to 19, which we actually had in our meditation, where it's clear that Habakkuk's vision has inspired him no end, and he's now confident that he's going to be able to endure whatever comes. Verse 17, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive might fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. In other words, the present reality is anything but what I desire. It's not what I envisioned, it's not what I hoped, it's not what I was working for, it's all gone to the proverbial. Nothing's blossoming in this circumstance or that circumstance of my life. It bears no resemblance. Yet, verse 18, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. How can he do that? It's because the vision of God's promises and the future victory is so strong and so clear in his mind. His mind could have been filled with the news of the day, all the rumours that were going on. He could have been focused on the suffering that was coming, the suffering that he was experiencing right then and there. But instead, he's now enabled to lift his mind above those things and focus on the sure promises of God. And so he says this, look at this, verse 19. God, the Lord, is my strength. And look at this phrase here. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. Feet like the deer. He's now running, you see. Faith in God's sure promises and his just judgment of the wicked gives his feet wings, as it were, and his message was to do the same for others who understood it, and it can do the same for us. And the writer to the Hebrews, if we just have a quick look over there in closing, he picks this up. Hebrews chapter 10 and 11, of course, we know, don't we, are the chapters of faith. And it makes complete sense that Habakkuk would be in the mind of the author. Verse 37 of Hebrews 10. For yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but we are of those who have faith and preserve their souls. So that's the end of Hebrews chapter 10. But then we know, don't we? He goes on to list all those who have lived by faith. We've got a list of them. These faithful men and women who, if you think about it, every single one of them are in circumstances other than what they would love to be in. Ideally, they want something more, something better. They're working for something invisible, but they see it. And that vision enabled each of them to perform for God in ways that ensured that they were living by faith. But at the end of chapter 11, he's made that list of the faithful, and he finishes that, and what does he do? Look at chapter 12. He goes back to allude to Habakkuk. Therefore, verse 1, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witness, all these faithful people, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. That's Habakkuk 2, isn't it? The just shall live by faith. They're going to read this message and they're going to be able to run. Let us now run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And so see how it was faith that enabled Jesus to be victorious too. His vision of the joy set before him enabled him to see beyond the cross, to see beyond the equivalent of the coming Chaldean for him, to the time when he would be at the right hand of his Father. And in doing so, he gave us a vision of sin being destroyed. We see it in the cross. In his personal victory over sin, we see the promise of a future comprehensive victory that the whole world will see and that we can experience now. And so, brothers and sisters, young people, in the midst of our personal griefs, in the midst of our sorrows, our troubles of the present reality, let's find the vision. Find your personal vision of the joy that is set before you. Is it to see loved ones again? Is it to see a world in which suffering is conquered? Is it a world in which you will see and hear the Lord's name praised every day because people will truly get what God has done for us? Is it to see principles like love and integrity rule the day instead of what you see now? Whatever it is, make the vision vivid. It's sure, it is certain. It might tarry, but it's not a lie. It's not a lie. So let us run with endurance the race set before us. And if I can just remind you of those words in the beautiful meditation that we had on the screen earlier. One day we know that the Lord, one day we know this for sure, he will end this work that he started in us. He will change this life that he fashioned from dust. One way we're found in the Lord. One day we know this for sure. We will look past just what we can see to the joy and the crown.
One day we know that the Lord, one day we know this for sure, he will end this work that he started in us. He will change this life that he fashioned from dust. One way we're found in the Lord, one way we know this for sure. We will look past just what we can see to the joy and crown, Lord, we believe. This mind of Christ, this comfort of his love, this joy in him, this power of his life. One life we have in the Lord, one life we know this for sure. We will let go all the things of the past. We will reach for Christ to shine in the dark. One mind, the mind of our Lord, one mind. We know this for sure. If we humbly serve each other in love, then the mind of Christ is working in us. This mind of Christ, this comfort of his love, this joy in him, this power of his life, this mind of Christ, this comfort of his love. And to Christ, to our King, every knee will bow. Let each tongue, let all sing, praise his name on high. And to God be our thanks, glory to the Father. Praise his name, lift him high. One day we know that the Lord, one day we know this for sure, he will end this work that he started.